He wasn't supposed to speak, just to stand there, silent, motionless, part of the palace itself. But when Trump pointed at him and barked, "Move! I'm the president!" what the guard said next ended the entire tour. It was supposed to be a routine visit. Cameras rolling, handshakes rehearsed, the kind of political theatre that comes and goes with the news cycle. But inside the gates of Buckingham Palace, the air is different. It belongs to history. And history does not move for anyone. Now, before we show you exactly what happened in that courtyard, let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. And make sure to subscribe with the bell icon on, because we share these real Royal Guard stories every single day. Because sometimes the most powerful words come from the quietest voice. The courtyard of Buckingham Palace had never looked more pristine. The morning sun poured down on centuries of stone and ceremony, catching the gold accents on the palace gates and the glass domes of waiting black limousines. To most visitors, it was just another royal photo op. But for the men in red, it was a battlefield of precision. Colour Sergeant Edward Langford, Coldstream Guards, stood motionless beside the marble archway leading into the state quadrangle. His boots gleamed. His rifle gleamed even brighter, and not a single muscle betrayed the heat seeping under the wool of his crimson tunic. The tourists beyond the gates whispered, phones raised, unaware that the man they photographed had been trained to hold his post even if thunder split the sky. Inside the palace, things were less still. Staff moved like clockwork, aides adjusting lapels, palace officials checking microphones, security officers murmuring into earpieces. A high-profile guest was minutes away. The name was known to everyone on site. Donald J. Trump, former President of the United States, had requested an informal heritage tour during his stay in London. It wasn't part of the official itinerary, just a private walk through the palace grounds for the cameras. The press had been carefully limited, but even so, the event carried the electricity of risk. At the edge of the quadrangle, Langford's commanding officer, Captain Harris, spoke quietly into his radio. "All stations ready. Maintain ceremonial bearing. I repeat, ceremonial bearing." Langford's earpiece remained silent. Guards didn't speak on duty. But he'd served long enough to know what that message meant. Prepare for disruption. The convoy appeared before the hour struck. A line of black SUVs rolled past the outer gates, engines purring, the flags of two nations fluttering side by side. The lead vehicle stopped in front of the palace steps. Doors opened in sequence. Secret Service agents first, scanning the area, then a blur of aides, press officers and photographers adjusting lenses. And then Trump emerged. He stepped out wearing his trademark confidence like a tailored suit, one hand raised in practiced acknowledgement of the cameras, the other tugging at his coat. His voice carried easily even across the courtyard. "Beautiful day for a royal visit," he said. As if the palace itself were part of his brand, Langford didn't move. From his post, he could see everything. The glint of Trump's cufflinks, the subtle panic of an aide trying to control the media distance, the faint irritation on Captain Harris's face as the group drifted off the marked path. Protocol dictated that no one, not a head of state, not a dignitary, not even the king himself during inspection, crossed the white boundary line uninvited. It was more than paint. It was centuries of discipline. But Trump was walking straight toward it. Cameras flashed. Staff tensed. Langford's heart didn't race. He'd been here before, not in palaces, but in war zones, where a single wrong move could undo everything order stood for. He drew one slow breath through his nose. The air smelled faintly of gun oil and summer roses. He would not move, because that was the order. And because sometimes the stillness itself was the warning. The sound came first, the kind of laugh that doesn't belong inside palace walls, loud, confident, and just a little too sure of itself. Trump's entourage followed closely behind him, a cluster of dark suits and earpieces glinting in the morning light. One aide held a small flag, another clutched a folder of notes, and somewhere near the back a journalist whispered to a cameraman, "Just get everything, trust me. Something always happens." Trump was supposed to stop at the cordoned-off walkway where palace protocol officers would brief him before the official photo. Instead, he drifted, half on purpose, half out of habit, toward the forecourt, where the red-coated guards stood like living monuments. "Let's get one with them," he said, gesturing toward Langford's position. "Nobody does it like the Brits. You can't buy that kind of discipline." His tone was half admiration, half showmanship. Cameras clicked. A palace aide hurried forward, palms raised. "Sir, this area is restricted," Trump waved him off. It's fine. I just want a better angle. What's the big deal?" Captain Harris, standing at a distance, shifted uncomfortably. He spoke into his radio. "Langford, maintain posture. Do not engage." But the line was already being tested. Trump crossed the painted boundary with 2 long strides, his shoes tapping against the ancient stone that separated ceremonial ground from tourist ground. Langford didn't move. The rifle in his hand remained locked, his chin perfectly level. The sunlight caught the edge of his bayonet and sent a thin beam of reflection across the courtyard, a quiet, accidental warning. Trump stopped just a few feet away. "Move," he said, with that half grin he often wore on stage. "I'm the President of the United States." A gasp rippled through the press line. A photographer lowered his camera, unsure whether to capture the moment or pretend it wasn't happening. Langford didn't even blink. His orders were absolute. Hold the line, acknowledge no one, break for no man. Trump's smile faltered. "You heard me," he said, louder this time, turning slightly as if to make sure the cameras were rolling. "Move aside, I'm trying to take a picture here." Still nothing. The silence stretched. Even the ever-present London traffic outside the gates seemed to fade away. One of Trump's security agents leaned in cautiously. "Sir, these guards don't respond. They're ceremonial." "I don't care," Trump interrupted. "It's a photo, not a negotiation. He can take 1 step to the left." Behind him, Captain Harris had begun walking briskly toward the scene, his posture radiating the kind of calm panic known only to officers in charge of royal protocol. He arrived just as Trump took 1 more step forward, close enough now to see the faint reflection of himself in the polished brass buttons of Langford's uniform. "Mr. President," Harris began carefully, "this man is not permitted to move or speak during ceremony. He's on guard under the Crown's order. Even I can't command him right now." Trump gave a short, incredulous laugh. "So, you're telling me this soldier outranks me?" Harris hesitated. "In this square, sir, everyone answers to duty." It was a strange sentence, the kind that didn't sound defiant, but final. For the first time since stepping out of the SUV, Trump seemed unsure whether he was being challenged or reminded of something larger than himself. His jaw tightened. Langford still hadn't moved. The faint wind caught the red fabric of his tunic, barely enough to make it flutter. But it was movement enough to remind everyone watching that he was, in fact, human. A living man standing perfectly still under the weight of both history and scrutiny. Trump looked him up and down, searching for any sign of reaction. "Tough guy, huh?" No reply. "All right," Trump said finally, shrugging. "Let's see how tough he is when I'm standing right here." He took 1 step closer, inside the invisible line that no one ever crossed. And that was when everything changed. Langford's boots shifted against the stone with the faintest scrape. His rifle angled forward, not aggressively, but with precise authority, the movement sharp enough to slice through the heavy silence. Every guard in sight froze even tighter. Harris stopped breathing. The Secret Service reached for their earpieces, but didn't move. Trump stood inches away now, the world's cameras waiting to see what would happen next. Langford's head turned exactly 15 degrees. His voice, when it came, was low and deliberate, the sound of centuries distilled into 1 sentence. "By order of His Majesty's Guard," he said, "you will remain where you are." The tone wasn't angry, it was final. The courtyard went dead silent. Even Trump didn't have a line ready for that. For a few seconds, the world seemed to stop turning, the sound of Langford's voice, calm, unwavering, and echoing against the palace walls, hung in the air like a verdict that could not be appealed. Every camera, every aide, every security agent froze in a tableau of disbelief. It was as if London itself had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. Trump blinked once, caught between outrage and uncertainty. He wasn't used to silence answering him. Not from press rooms, not from generals, not from anyone. But there was something in Langford's stillness, an authority that didn't ask permission and didn't need to prove itself. Captain Harris, standing just off to the side, lowered his head slightly. He knew what that moment meant. The guard had spoken. Something that happened so rarely it bordered on sacred. Breaking silence under uniform wasn't defiance. It was duty, exercised only when a boundary sacred to the crown had been breached. "Sir," Harris said carefully, his voice low but urgent, "I'd advise you to step back." Trump turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. "Step back? From him?" He motioned toward Langford with a dismissive flick of the hand. "He just told me where I can stand, in my own photograph." Harris didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence, too, was a form of discipline. The wind shifted slightly, carrying with it the faint scent of polished metal and old roses from the palace gardens. The flags above the entrance stirred, their colours reflected in the mirrored lenses of the security team standing like statues behind the line. Somewhere beyond the gates, a group of tourists watched, oblivious to the scale of what was unfolding inside. Trump exhaled sharply, gesturing at Langford again. "This is ridiculous. Someone tell him who I am!" And that was when the Secret Service stepped forward, not to support him, but to protect him. One agent, tall and composed, spoke quietly. "Sir, the guard isn't acting against you. He's maintaining royal security protocol. You're in his protected perimeter." "Protected perimeter?" Trump repeated, incredulous. "I'm the guest here." "Yes, sir," the agent replied evenly, "and he's the host's guard." That subtle line, "the host's guard," settled heavily. Even Trump, for all his bluster, understood the implication. Inside these walls, sovereignty belonged to someone else. Not America, not him. Langford hadn't moved since speaking. His eyes stayed fixed forward, his chin level, his hands perfectly positioned along the rifle. But beneath that motionless surface, his mind was alert, tracking every angle, every sound, every tension in the air. He wasn't thinking of politics. He wasn't thinking of cameras or careers. He was thinking of the single rule drilled into every guard since the regiment was formed. If the integrity of post is compromised, presence becomes command. The courtyard was silent, but for the faint clicking of cameras adjusting focus. The journalists, sensing the weight of the moment, dared not interrupt. They had seen political arguments, verbal sparring, staged conflict. But this was something else. This was a living symbol, refusing to yield to power, not with rebellion, but with principle. Trump looked around, expecting laughter or validation. None came. The aides avoided his eyes. The officers stood firm. Even the press, hungry for spectacle, seemed struck by a strange kind of reverence, and he took one half-step back. The rifles of the surrounding guards remained still, but the air shifted, a subtle easing of invisible tension. Captain Harris finally spoke, his tone measured but firm. "Thank you, Mr. President. If you'll please follow me, we'll proceed to the interior gallery." Trump said nothing. He straightened his jacket, forced a chuckle that didn't quite reach his eyes, and muttered, "Toughest security in the world, huh?" Then he turned and began walking toward the palace steps, his entourage following in silence. Behind him, Langford returned to absolute stillness, his posture resuming its perfect symmetry. The world slowly began to move again. Footsteps, murmurs, the soft mechanical clicks of cameras being lowered. But the mood had changed. The courtyard no longer belonged to spectacle. It belonged to silence. And in that silence, the message was clear. Some authority doesn't shout. It simply stands. Inside the palace halls, the air felt denser. Polished oak, velvet drapes, centuries of authority built into the very geometry of the place. Every footstep of Trump's entourage echoed with the arrogance of movement in a space designed for stillness. Captain Harris led the group forward, keeping his voice even. "This corridor dates back to King George III," he explained. "It has witnessed every formal audience since—" Yeah, Trump interrupted, glancing up at the portraits. "I've got paintings just like these at Mar-a-Lago. Beautiful lighting, better lighting, actually." The staff exchanged subtle looks. Harris continued his speech as if the interruption hadn't happened. His job was not to correct, it was to contain. Behind them, Sergeant Langford and two other guards resumed escort formation, maintaining ceremonial distance. They didn't follow as protectors. They followed as symbols, their presence ensuring the sanctity of the path being taken. Trump gestured vaguely at Langford. "He's the one who told me to stay put, right? What's his name?" "Colour Sergeant Edward Langford," Harris replied. "Langford," Trump repeated, testing the word like it might yield obedience if said confidently enough. "Tough guy, I like him, but he should know who he's talking to." Harris didn't look back. "He does, sir, and he also knows who he's serving." The reply hung in the air, polite but immovable. They entered the East Gallery, a long, luminous hall lined with portraits of monarchs and commanders. Cameras clicked as the entourage fanned out. Palace aides had planned for this, but not for what came next. Trump walked directly toward a roped-off section displaying the late Queen's ceremonial regalia, a velvet robe, a gold-tipped scepter, and a pair of gloves placed beneath a glass dome. A discreet plaque read, "Restricted, Royal Heritage Display." "Beautiful," Trump said. "These would look incredible in the Oval Office display. You think they'd let me borrow them for a week?" A few nervous laughs fluttered from his aides, uncertain whether it was a joke. Captain Harris stepped forward. "Sir, I must ask that you not cross the barrier." Trump waved him off. "Relax, I'm just looking." But his polished shoe nudged the velvet rope forward. That sound, the faint tap of the metal stanchion moving, echoed louder than thunder in that hall. Langford's boots clicked once, in a movement so swift it almost defied logic. He repositioned himself between Trump and the display, his rifle still at ceremonial rest, but angled with absolute precision. The motion wasn't aggressive, it was defensive, procedural, ancient. The Secret Service froze. They'd been briefed on foreign ceremonial security, but seeing it unfold, the sharp geometry of authority, the wordless rebuke, was something else entirely. Trump blinked, startled. "What's this? I wasn't going to touch anything." Langford didn't answer. He couldn't. Silence was the law, and in that silence lay centuries of meaning. Captain Harris spoke quietly, almost reverently. "Mr. President, please step back. That robe was worn by Her Majesty on Coronation Day. It has not been approached without permission since." Trump's voice rose slightly, disbelief breaking through his restraint. "Since when does a soldier tell the president where to stand?" This time, Harris didn't respond. But Langford did something subtle, something that no camera would catch unless it was looking for it. He lowered his chin half an inch, not as defiance, not as submission, but as acknowledgement of the object behind him. The robe, the crown, the memory. Trump's gaze flickered between the guard, the relics, and the expectant faces around him. He wasn't used to silence winning the room. He was used to applause, conflict, noise. Here, the absence of response was louder than any answer. "Fine," he said finally, stepping back, his tone halfway between irritation and respect. "Fine. Wouldn't want to upset tradition." Harris nodded once. "Thank you, sir." Langford resumed his exact position, rifle upright, eyes forward, as though the moment had never happened. But it had, and every person in that hall knew it, because something unspoken had just occurred. Not between nations, but between eras. Power had tested principle, and principle hadn't moved. When the tour concluded, the official footage captured only the polished moments, handshakes, practiced smiles, and a few words exchanged beside the palace fountain. But what the cameras missed were the seconds after the motorcade disappeared beyond the iron gates. Langford was still standing at his post when the courtyard returned to its usual rhythm. Tourists murmuring, pigeons fluttering, the steady tick of the palace clock echoing above the quadrangle. He hadn't moved since the confrontation. The silence of discipline had become something heavier, a quiet acknowledgement of what had nearly happened. Captain Harris approached slowly, removing his gloves with a measured precision. "At ease, Sergeant." Langford shifted his weight by half an inch, the ceremonial equivalent of a deep breath. "You understand," Harris said quietly. "What you did, what you said, was outside standard bearing." "Yes, sir." "But," Harris continued, lowering his voice, "it was necessary." They stood together in silence, both men watching the space where the former president had stood moments earlier. The marble tiles still carried faint footprints where protocol had been tested and upheld. "It's strange, isn't it?" Harris said finally. "All that power, and still, it can't cross a line that was drawn centuries ago." Langford said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence spoke the same truth his voice had. That authority borrowed is never the same as authority earned. From the gallery above, a faint echo drifted down. Footsteps and laughter. The next group of visitors being escorted through the state rooms, blissfully unaware of the tension that had just unfolded below them. The palace would go on as it always had, each day identical, each moment measured. But somewhere within its walls, a line had been redrawn, not on the floor, but in memory. Later that evening, inside the guard wing, Langford removed his bearskin and placed it gently on the wooden peg above his locker. The room smelled faintly of polish and linen, the quiet hum of radiators filling the space between unspoken thoughts. Around him, the younger guards traded murmured stories about the day's event, how the American president had demanded movement from a man trained never to move. Most retellings were exaggerated, as stories tend to be, but the core remained the same. The guard didn't flinch. Langford sat on the bench, unbuttoning his tunic, when Sergeant Atkins from the next post stepped in. "Word travels fast," Atkins said with a grin. "Heard you told the president to stay put." Langford didn't look up. "I told him to remain where he was." "Same difference, isn't it?" Langford finally glanced over, a faint glint of dry humour in his eyes. "Not for me." Atkins nodded, suddenly more serious. "Well, it's good someone reminded him. There's a reason we stand here, and not just for show." Langford closed the locker with a quiet click. "The uniform speaks for itself. If it ever stops doing that, we're just costumes." For a long moment neither man spoke. The room carried that peculiar peace that only comes after confrontation, a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Outside, the evening bells began to toll over the city, slow, solemn, timeless. Langford straightened his posture by instinct, his body remembering duty even at rest. In the following days, the video footage from the incident would surface in snippets. Shaky clips recorded from the courtyard, half-audible murmurs of surprise, a still frame of Trump frozen mid-gesture as the guard's words echoed faintly. "You will remain where you are." It would go viral for all the reasons that didn't matter. People debated tone, politics, even whether the guard should have spoken at all. But those who understood service saw something else entirely. Not defiance, not spectacle, just duty. A quiet, unbending line between power and principle. And long after the noise faded, that single image of a motionless man in red standing against movement itself would remain etched into memory, a reminder that not every command can be followed, and not every silence is weakness. By the next morning, the story had spread farther than the palace gates, not through press conferences or official statements, but through whispers, phone calls, and headlines that all asked the same question. Did the Royal Guard really tell a US president to stop? Inside the palace, the staff moved with their usual composure, pretending the world wasn't talking about them. But behind the formality, everyone knew something unusual had happened. For the first time in decades, the public wasn't laughing at a guard video, they were listening to one. Langford reported for duty as always, boots polished, tunic immaculate, bearing unshaken. His name had already made its quiet rounds through the guard wing, though no one said it out loud when officers passed by. He'd done what no one was supposed to, spoken while on post, yet somehow no one seemed to think it was wrong. When Captain Harris found him that morning, he didn't start with reprimand. He simply handed him an envelope, the kind with the royal seal pressed into the flap. "From His Majesty's private secretary," Harris said, his voice unreadable. Langford accepted it silently. He didn't open it right away. Duty came first. But as the clock struck the hour and the rotation bell echoed through the courtyard, he found a quiet moment in the mess hall and broke the seal. Inside was a short note written in the crisp, unmistakable handwriting used in palace correspondence. "Colour Sergeant Langford, His Majesty has been informed of your conduct during yesterday's incident in the quadrangle. He wishes it to be known that your response, measured, dignified and faithful to the code of service, upheld the honour of the guard and the crown alike. Let it be a reminder that sometimes the strength of silence lies not in obedience, but in knowing when to speak for what must not be crossed. Private Secretary to His Majesty the King." Langford read it twice, not out of disbelief, but out of respect. The words weren't effusive. They didn't need to be. In a world built on formality, even a single sentence of approval from the crown carried the weight of centuries. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope before tucking it into the inside pocket of his uniform. Then, as if nothing had happened, he resumed his inspection duties, adjusting a buckle here, checking a rifle sling there, speaking only when required. Later that afternoon, he passed through the west corridor, the same one where the king occasionally crossed paths with his ceremonial units on inspection days. Today, by chance or intention, His Majesty himself was there. King Charles stood beside a display case of regimental honours, speaking softly with two senior aides. When he noticed Langford approaching, the aides stepped aside. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of boots on marble. Langford stopped at regulation distance, heels together, rifle upright, chin level. The king regarded him for a long moment. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes carried that familiar mixture of scrutiny and quiet warmth that soldiers knew well. "Sergeant Langford," he said, his voice calm but clear, "you reminded the world yesterday what this uniform stands for." Langford didn't reply. He wasn't supposed to, but the king nodded slightly, as if answering his silence himself. "There are moments," the king continued, "when duty demands not grand gestures, but steadiness. The world often confuses stillness with submission. You proved them wrong." He paused, studying the man before him. The same immovable posture, the same composed bearing that had outlasted pride itself. Then, with a faint, almost fatherly tone, the king added, "Well held, Sergeant. Very well held indeed." He moved on, conversation resuming with his aides as though nothing historic had been said. But Langford stood in that corridor for a moment longer, letting the words sink through the layers of discipline that usually kept him untouchable. When he finally stepped outside, the air smelled of summer rain and iron gates. Across the forecourt, tourists were gathering again, laughing, pointing, taking photos, unaware that history had passed through this ground less than a day ago. Langford resumed his post, eyes forward, expression still. The world would keep moving, presidents would come and go, cameras would flash and fade, but some things didn't change. Not because they refused to, but because they were meant to endure. And as the bells of Buckingham Palace tolled the hour, Langford stood exactly where he had always stood, guarding not just a gate, but the idea that some forms of power are quiet and eternal. So what do you think? If you had been there that day, standing just a few feet away, would you have supported the guard for upholding centuries of protocol? Or the president for demanding his space? And here's another question. In a world where power often shouts the loudest, do you still believe there's strength in silence? The kind that doesn't bend, doesn't argue, doesn't boast, just stands? Tell us your thoughts down below. We read every single comment, and your perspective genuinely matters here. If this story reminded you that real authority doesn't come from titles or noise, but from discipline, respect, and stillness, then hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe and tap the bell icon, because we share new Royal Guard stories every single day. Stories that reveal the humanity, honour and quiet strength behind these uniforms. And if you know someone who still thinks the Guards are just for show, share this video with them. Let them see what duty truly looks like. Our other videos are already appearing on your screen, each one uncovering another true-to-life story from the palace gates to the streets of London. Go ahead, watch the next one now. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with another story that proves one timeless truth. Real power doesn't demand attention. It earns it by standing still.